Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the latest edition of the Beacon Stack webinar. Today, we're going to talk to you about Eddystone beacons. I know it's been all over the blogs and the media. Everyone's talking about new Google format, so we thought we'd put together a complete information deck on everything you need to know about Eddystone beacons. So we'll go over that over the next 30 to 40 minutes. And of course, we'll take questions at the very end. Feel free to type your questions into the questions window at any point during the session. And what we'll do is take all questions at the very end and answer them one by one. So yeah, please feel free to ask us whatever's on your mind. I'm really happy, and it's a real pleasure to have with us today on the webinar Nagaraj, who is my colleague and Director of Product Management at Mobstack. Nagaraj, welcome to the Beacon Stack webinar.
Thank you, Ravi. It's a pleasure indeed to be talking to people who are so interested in beacons and want to explore what they can do with beacons and see how Eddystone beacons are going to have an impact on their business.
Great. No, I'm sure that it's going to be a fun session. I'm really looking forward to it. To be honest with you, I'm looking forward to a lot of your perspective on Eddystone and what that really means for customers and things like that. So I think it's going to be a good session. Thank you again for joining us. So let's get started, shall we? I guess we should do the bare minimum, which is what beacons are, and I know most people on the webinar today already possibly know this, but I'll just go over the basics just so that everyone's on the same page. Beacons are low-cost, low-power transmitters, and these transmitters have Bluetooth low-energy chips, also known as Bluetooth 4.0 or Bluetooth Smart. Now, this is the latest version of the Bluetooth protocol, which means that it's given that its name is low energy, it's actually a lot more energy efficient and doesn't drain the battery as much. And these beacons are transmitting a signal, a radio signal. This radio signal can be picked up by a mobile device, in most cases the smartphone in your pocket or your iPad or any such device with a BLE receiver in it or a BLE chip. Is essentially detecting the signal, and this signal is used by the mobile device to kind of calculate where it is with respect to the transmitter, whether it's 1 foot away or 2 feet away. So in some sense, beacons are used to determine microlocation or proximity to a known point. And the beacon is transmitting like the signal with a bunch of unique identifiers in it, and the smartphone or an app inside the smartphone kind of decodes that information, then uses it to identify the beacon, and also uses what is known as the RSSI, the signal strength. It uses that to determine how far it is. So usually gets a fairly decent estimate of whether it's about a meter away from the beacon, or even really close, like 10 centimeters away, or really much further away, right, like 10 or 20 meters away. So that's how beacons work, and that's just the very basic of how proximity is used between a beacon and a smartphone. Having gotten that out of the way, today's webinar, we're going to talk about what Eddystone really is about. So the Eddystone format that Google announced. IBECON versus Eddystone, what does it really mean? I mean, what Apple has been backing IBECON for a while. Most of us use the word IBECON interchangeably with beacon. So what does that really mean now? What does IBECON versus Eddystone really mean for us? We're going to talk to you about whether Eddystone really affects your beacon project. I mean, if it does, how does it affect your project? And whether you really have to change anything at this point. We'll go over some use cases. We'll go over some very Eddystone specific use cases, because we think that it's quite interesting, some of the possibilities that it enables. And we'd like to talk about how you can possibly use some of these new features that Eddystone has exposed. Beacon Stack support for Eddystone. I'm sure some of you are already wondering, and those of you who have already bought our Beacon Stack starter kit, I'm sure are wondering when that's coming. So we'll talk about that, and we'll wind up with a bunch of FAQs, which we've already received plenty of, and then of course at the very end we'll take questions from the audience who's dialed into this webinar live. So without much ado, let's get going. Let's talk about Eddystone. What is Eddystone? Eddystone is a new format for the BLE packets that a beacon is broadcasting. BLE packet is essentially a bunch of data that your beacon is transmitting or configured to transmit. And IBECON was just another way or another format for a BLE packet. Eddystone is the new format which Google has announced and is supposedly open. So essentially what that means is it could change with input from multiple companies. But it's a different way of broadcasting a packet, a BLE packet. It's got a different format. What's interesting and unique about it is that it is cross-platform by design. So it's designed to work on both Android and iOS. And any platform, honestly, that supports BLE beacons. So technically, you could be building on a MediaTek board which has a BLE chipset on it, and you could be which supports reading of BLE packets, and you could support that on that kind of a device as well. So it is technically compatible with those devices as well. That's Eddystone. So Eddystone is just the BLE format that we're talking about. It's the exact equivalent of IBECON. I know that there have been a bunch of announcements by Google about some of the other APIs that they've launched, like the proximity beacon API. They've launched the nearby APIs related to beacons, and they've also launched something called the beacon platform, right? The Google beacon platform. Those are different things. Those are not the same as Eddystone. They're just a bunch of APIs and services that Google is exposing to developers. We're going to focus about what Eddystone really can do and what it means for people like us who are working with beacons every day. So how does Eddystone really compare to IBECON, right? What are the differences? First things first, IBECON comes from Apple. It's technically Android and iOS compatible because it uses the BLE packets for its magic, which of course is open. An Android device can also read BLE packets, but it's native only on iOS. What that means is iOS has built-in support for reading special service identifiers inside the BLE packets. iOS can do things like wake up an app, that may be listening for certain set of beacons. So, you can broadcast essentially with an iBeacon, you can broadcast a single advertising packet. Which has got a unique identifier. That's pretty much it. So there are no multiple types of packets. I'll get to this in a minute. Of course, when we said it's native only on iOS, what we really meant to say is that Apple doesn't do anything to support it on Android devices. But that being said, Android is something you can use. Android devices are perfectly compatible with beacons that are sold in the world today, including our beacons. And in fact, the Beacon Stack SDK can wake Android apps up even if they're killed, even if they're not running in the background. So those are some of the things that companies like ours have done on top of IBECON. But fundamentally, IBECON is an Apple standard that was native to iOS. Now, Eddystone, on the other hand, is also Android and iOS compatible, but it is native on Android. It's expected to be built in completely, built into Android's next release, which is Android M. So that's a big advantage, because Android, after all, has a very significant user base worldwide. I don't think anyone needs to be told about what kind of install base Android has around the world. But moving on to the technical detail, on an Eddystone BLE or beacon, you can broadcast 3 different advertising packets. They all have different specifications. We'll get to them in a minute, but it's not just one packet. That's the main thing. There are different kinds of packets, and they're meant to serve different functions. It is actually possible to use the Eddystone specification. It is designed to actually wake an iOS app up, a closed iOS app up, but we're not aware of any implementation at the moment that actually does that. No framework for it yet, but technically it could work. So that's IBECON versus Eddystone for you. And what I want to get into really now is what is really the specification that we were talking about. What are these 3 different types of packets that the Eddystone spec says a beacon must be broadcasted? So the 3 types are, there's like an Eddystone UID frame, which is one kind. There's another called Eddystone URL, which is the second kind, and then there's a third one called Eddystone TLM, where TLM is short for telemetry. I'll explain in a minute what that means. Now, the UID Eddystone UID frame is essentially very similar to the IBECON one, the current IBECON identifier frame, in the sense that it's basically transmitting a number for identification purposes, but its format is a little different. It's 16 bytes long, and it's essentially divided into a namespace, for 10 bytes for the namespace and 6 bytes for like the device itself, like a unique identifier. So there are only two parts to it. Now, if you contrast this with iBeacon, you have a UUID, you have a major number and a minor number. So there's three different numbers that come together to form the identifier. So in that sense, and I just want to make it clear, an Eddystone UID is not compatible with an iBeacon frame, which has a UUID, major and minor number. They're completely different. The bytes that are in the packets, you have to interpret them differently. An Eddystone URL frame essentially contains, as the name suggests, a URL instead of a numeric identifier. There's no numbers in it. There's actually a URL, and it's a compressed URL, obviously because not a lot of space on the BLE packet. But it's got 17 bytes available to it. So you can use up to 17 bytes to put a URL in there. And essentially what this is really meant to do is allow an app that's detecting the beacon to kind of read this URL and then maybe open it in a browser or navigate to it or do something like that. And this comes from the Google URI beacon that was, that predates the Eddystone stuff. But essentially the idea is that you don't really need anything beyond the URL, and it's just possible, should be possible to open it up in a browser. That's what it does, the Eddystone URL frame. The telemetry frame, Eddystone TLM, is really meant to encapsulate beacon health status, or really metadata about the beacon and its current status. So it could be, for example, what the battery levels are, if the beacon has sensors on it, like a temperature sensor or a light sensor, or even an accelerometer or something. Some of these values can be embedded in the TLM packet, and mainly they're intended for fleet management and diagnostics kind of use cases. And also they're meant to be broadcast a little less frequently than the data packets, because it's not really essential to transmit every 100 milliseconds the status of your beacon's battery and things like that. So that's the Eddystone, those are the three kinds of Eddystone packets that we talked about earlier, and that's in the spec. So that's pretty straightforward. I think in terms of what it adds, I think the URL is really the most interesting and unique thing. Now, the question that's probably on everyone's mind, Nagarajan, I'm sure you've gotten this quite a bit already, right? So yes, that's the reason I think we have a slide dedicated to talking about this. What does Eddystone really mean for your beacon project? Will it affect the project? How does it affect the project? So I'd love to get your perspective, Nagaraj, and I'm sure our audience would like to hear that as well.
Yeah, that's a great question, Ravi, and it's something that's come up in many conversations over the last week or 10 days. Mm-hmm. And yes, I'll be happy to give you my perspective on this. Now, frankly, I don't think the Eddystone announcement should have any effect at all on current, ongoing, or planned pilot projects with beacons.
Okay.
And the reason for that is very straightforward. Nobody sets out to do an iBeacon pilot or an Eddystone pilot. Businesses typically try and derive value out of their assets, mm-hmm. and sometimes if that asset is a location, like a large warehouse or a large mall or a large airport, mm-hmm. or a train station, whatever that might be, the leverage that is possible that can bring in extra business value, either in terms of increased revenues or reduced costs, is based on physical presence of a stakeholder. It could be a customer in a retail space, it could be a service provider in a warehouse space, it could be a taxpayer in a public utility or public space, right? In all these cases, the key lever is the fact that the business wants to do something by detecting the stakeholder's proximity to a given specific area or location. Now, having said that, what were the technologies that were used earlier to determine this? Course network location was one, GPS was another. Now we know that the granularity and the accuracy with which these technologies could give you the location of a specific individual or device in a given space is fairly loose. And beacons, and more specifically iBeacons, since 2013 have been around that make possible location accuracy up to as low as immediate, meaning that somebody is standing right on top of the beacon or right under the beacon. Right? And now that's fantastic accuracy given all the other technologies available till that point. Now, if your use case requirement is something that wants the application to be cognizant of presence or proximity within, let's say, a range of a meter to about 20 meters, then iBeacon is already there.
Right.
It's available right now. It's something that you can order the beacons, set them up in a space and work with them, and they will do all the things that you want to do with proximity, right? That is number one. The second question is, we tend to get caught up with the fact that iBeacon is an Apple framework or spec, and Eddystone is a Google spec. Apple makes iOS, Google makes Android. Oh wow, Android, billions of devices, lot more installed base, like you said earlier, and I want to do something with it. Perfectly fine, but just keep in mind that there have been Android apps that use iBeacon technology with the same efficiency that iOS apps, contemporary or rather analogous iOS apps have done.
That's right.
Right? So it is not like iBeacon does not work with Android, or iBeacon doesn't expose its full feature set to Android. There is no such limitation.
Right.
Now, having said that, the third thing is, it's a natural question, and I've heard this before. Oh, iBeacon transmits only one frame, and Eddystone has these 3 frames. Yes, that's a fair point. But in reality, the only truly different frame that is available from Eddystone, which is not available from the iBeacon frame, is the URL frame. Right?
Yeah.
So the Eddystone UID frame is an identifier. It identifies the beacon, so that when the app sees that beacon, it can contact a central server or a central directory and say, I am seeing this beacon, what do I do?
Right.
That is what an iBeacon app, iBeacon enabled app would do when it sees an iBeacon, and that's precisely what an Eddystone enabled app will do when it sees an Eddystone UID.
Yeah,
right?
Exactly.
The second point is that Eddystone has something called the Eddystone URL frame. Now, there is no true equivalent in the iBeacon specification, but here's something interesting. BeaconStack, since May of last year, has the ability to send targeted web page push notifications, but the only difference is, in Eddystone URL's case, it can do so with the browser, but in BeaconStack's case, it requires a particular app with the BeaconStack SDK to be installed. Right? And the last packet that we should keep in mind is the Eddystone TLM packet. I'm sure that if you are participating in this particular webinar, you have either seen BeaconStack's own fleet management solutions, or you have tried one of the other beacon manufacturers' platforms. All of us do offer fleet management. We follow different implementations. Some of us allow fleet management from the server, some of us allow it from the app, some of us follow a hybrid model. But irrespective of that, the fact remains that TLM allows you to do something in a separate packet. It sort of abstracts the maintenance packets away from messaging packets.
That's right.
But that
It's
is
not
something that we were doing earlier.
anyway, right. Actually, it's interesting that you bring that up, Nagaraj. Actually, I was thinking about the URL packet, and quite honestly, um, if you think about Eddystone URL, it still today requires that you have a browser that even knows to look for these frames and these packets, from the BLE device or BLE chip, and you need, in that sense, if you look at what Google has done, Google went and updated Chrome on iOS. So technically, if you decide to go and roll out 100 Eddystone beacons, and you say, oh, I'm going to now magically message my users or ping them with this URL, guess what? Most of those users don't have any software that can even read the beacon with the URL in it. They have to have Chrome's latest version on iOS to even see this, right? So in that sense, it's not like it's all automatic. You still need support for the Eddystone URL packet in well-known apps. It's a different thing that Android's planning to, I guess, make it standard in the next release of the M release of Android. Yeah.
The irony of this whole thing, in fact, Ravi, is this, that Eddystone URL's first set of support is actually on iOS.
Right. Yeah, that's true.
Right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Fair enough. Cool. So that makes sense, and I agree with everything you've said there, Nagaraj. But let's dive in a little bit, right? So we do think that Eddystone Eddystone is interesting as a spec, and it has this unique URL feature. So I know you've put together some use cases on what's possible with the Eddystone with an Eddystone beacon. So the first one, it looks like, is something about public spaces. Help me understand this one, Nagaraj.
Yes. So there are public spaces like parks, maybe bus stations, train stations, public utility spaces,
Right.
so to speak. And typically what happens with these spaces is that the management of that space, whoever it may be, it could be the government or it could be somebody who's contracted to manage that space, usually has a concessionaire.
Right.
Who is allowed to place advertising, who is allowed to place
Coffee
vending
machine.
machines, who
Right.
is allowed to place small kiosks serving
Right.
various things. And typically the concessionaire's business model involves rapid turnover of whatever it is that he or she has been allowed to vend, so to speak. And one of these, I believe, in the future could be the right to place Bluetooth beacons so that it can be used to message people, and therefore there's a layer of revenue that can be taken
Right.
out of that.
So in this case, you're talking about making it a part of a contest, or is that
Yes.
example?
So typically, what would happen with something like this is, let's say you're a coffee machine franchise, and you have a large number of these concessions placed all over the public spaces in your particular city, right? Typically, what you would do is you would want to run your own messaging, but to have an additional layer of revenue, you might say, let me send marketing communication related to events happening in the neighborhood. It could be for a specific sale or a bargain section that is
Right.
happening in a close
Some kind of
nearby
advertisement, basically.
retail. Yes, think of it as an automatic. People who hand out pamphlets at the
Right,
station
flyers,
as you are
yeah.
exiting. Think of this as an electronic flyer.
Right.
Right.
That's a good way of thinking about it.
And this is something that does not require an app. This can be used by concessionaires as well as their clients who do not have the wherewithal to have a dedicated app for this.
Got it. Great. Yeah, that makes sense. I think that is a good use case. Moving on, it looks like there's another use case around like a bus transport system or some other public utility. It appears. Tell us a little bit about this one, Nagaraj.
Yes. So imagine you're on holiday in some other city, not your hometown. Let's say you're in Rome and you're on holiday. You're waiting for a bus to take you back to your hotel, let's say, and you just want to know when your next bus is coming along.
Right.
Now you would be extremely peeved, I'm sure, annoyed, if you were told download the Rome Metropolitan Bus app,
Right.
right? Because
Yeah.
you're just going to download it the one time just for this one map, and then you're going to uninstall it.
Right.
Now, the other option, of course, is that you could run a web search for this, but that's going to take time. So it's far simpler that if there's a Eddystone beacon placed at the bus shelter, then as you walk into that, it'll show you the list of the buses that are going to pass by in the next half hour, let's
Right.
say.
Yeah, yeah.
Right?
Got it.
Very simple, very straightforward.
And it does away with the need to download the app. And I think that's an interesting use case, mainly because think about it, at least when I'm on holiday, I never have data. I don't have access to
Precisely,
data,
yes.
so I can't download the app from the app store when I'm standing at the bus stop. So I think this is definitely interesting. I mean, of course, there are limitations like in every other use case, but I think this is a good one for flyby use, right? Where you don't have to. I guess the other thing it does is, as someone who's running the app and managing the management that owns the app, you don't get these single use installs, right, where people install the app and then delete it, right?
Yes, that's a very good point actually, because in most cases the digital marketer for that app would probably get dashed up for
Right.
that.
That's true. Cool. Moving on, in the third use case you were talking about more commercial settings. I guess we're talking about something like a mall or some kind of
Yes.
retail store, perhaps. So,
Yes.
how does this one work?
One of the most frequent questions that we've had for a really long time now, actually, has been around the fact that, great, it's fantastic that I can enable proximity features in my app, but the key thing is this: how do I get people to download my app?
Right.
Right? And I think the Eddystone URL format is something that will help with app distribution. So if you were a mall manager and you want people to download your mall app, then the first thing that you could do is to have an Eddystone URL packet, so you can
Right.
prompt people to say, "Are you a frequent visitor? Why don't you download our app?" And we'll give you great offers.
Yeah, yeah. I like this one in particular because I think it's a fairly valid use case, right? I mean, most of the time when I walk in to a mall or something, I actually don't even know what that app is called. I don't know where to find it. I'm not likely to run a search for it on the App Store. So I think if I were to get a URL directly to the app, and if I just clicked it and it just took me to the app page and I could just hit download, I think you would get a lot more frictionless installs, and it's also a lot more context sensitive, right? So I'm getting the URL and I'm downloading the app only because I'm really inside the mall at that point. I mean,
Yes.
I'm not being asked to do it at some other point, or when I'm busy and I don't really have time to install a mall app. So yeah, that's a good one. I think that's something which I'm sure will be put to use. I guess moving on from use cases, it's probably on a lot of people's minds. What is Beacon Stack going to do about support for Eddystone? So I think it's a good time for us to talk about what's coming in terms of Eddystone support. And I know that we have planned an experimental release for Eddystone for us to
Yes.
support some basic things. So Nagaraj, please do tell us what's coming. Tell the audience what they should expect.
We've been working very, very hard for the last 1 week or so, and we intend to do 2 or 3 things within the next 1 month. So what you will see is there will be a new firmware release that will be in the next 3 weeks or so that will allow Beacon Stack beacons to transmit in the Eddystone format. This is an experimental release, like Ravi said, so please bear in mind that all the features that we release in the next 1 month will be on what is pretty much a beta release. To go with the firmware release, we'll also release an updated SDK that will be able to detect beacons that are transmitting in the Eddystone spec. And most important, you would still be able to monitor the fleet in the Beacon Stack portal, irrespective of whether a specific beacon is transmitting in the IBECON format or the Eddystone format.
Great. So that's, I guess, coming in about a month. And
Yes.
what about the future? How is the Beacon Stack platform itself going to evolve as a result of Eddystone? I guess that's the question that I have.
Yes. So, our guiding principle moving forward on this particular question is this: no customer of ours should really be worrying about, should I use iBeacon, should I use Eddystone, can I use both?
Right.
All of these have to be wiped from their minds. They should focus on the business value that proximity enablement of their apps can bring them. Period. This basically means that the Beacon Stack platform will have some way of working with all your beacons in your fleet, irrespective of whether they are transmitting in iBeacon format or the Eddystone format.
Excellent. And I guess by extension, the rest of our platform, including the content management pieces and all the rules and actions and all of that stuff, eventually will just be completely agnostic. So they'll work with Beacon.
Yes, absolutely. We do not even want the customer to think twice about, is this beacon transmitting in
Right.
Eddystone
That's
or
absolutely,
iBeacon.
yeah, that makes sense. Great. Um, so I guess what would be helpful at this point, Nagaraj, is since we've talked about a number of things, there have been a number of questions that have come over the last 2 weeks. So we've compiled a list, we've put it together as an Eddystone FAQs. So I'll just go over the list and please do share your thoughts on these questions. So can the same beacon support Eddystone as well as iBeacon?
Yes, the same beacon that beacon stack, the individual beacons that beacon stack ships to you will be able to support both formats. But as mentioned, the firmware update that is coming in will allow you to use only one of those formats at one point in time.
Got it. Okay, you have to switch between the two basically.
Precisely, yes.
Okay. All right. Can a single app work with Eddystone and iBeacon at the same time?
It is possible. It is something that we ourselves will strive towards, but
Okay.
I do not know of any current implementation like that.
Okay. All right. So nobody's really done it yet.
No.
Okay. All right. And under what circumstances does Eddystone push content to a phone that has no app installed? How does that work?
Oh, great question. This is something that comes up fairly frequently. Um, so the only way that Eddystone can work with a device that does not have an compatible app, so to speak, installed, is to transmit using the Eddystone URL packet. Now, having said that, it also means that currently there is only the physical web browser in Android that is capable of receiving this. We expect that the next Chrome release or the release of Android M, either one of those, whichever is earlier, will have complete support for Eddystone URLs within the whole Android platform. Um, what it also means is that the currently available Chrome browser for iOS, when you enable its notifications for the today notifications in your iOS device, that does have the ability to do
Eddystone URL.
Eddystone URL.
And I guess as a business owner, can I decide whom to send these URLs to? I mean,
No,
who receives these URLs?
you do not have any control over it. So basically, when anybody that has a device that has an app that is capable of reading the Eddystone URL and presenting a web page, all of them will get it. There is no customer segmentation that is possible, so to speak.
Got it. Got it. Okay. But then, I was aware that, I know that in Beacon Stack we have a way of segmenting, you customers and being able to send URLs only to a specific group of them.
Yes.
How does that work?
Oh, I'm glad you asked that question, Ravi, because something that we are actually very proud of.
Okay.
We have a concept called custom attributes in our platform that allows you to define a customer's profile using age, gender. You could use other profile metrics such as parameters such as is this person a loyalty club member or a rewards point member and so on. And you could use these attributes to create your campaign rules. So it is possible for me to say something like, show this message only to a lady who is below 40 years of age.
Sure.
Yeah. Of course, you know the caveat here, which is that there is the need for an app,
Yeah.
and there is the need for the beacon statistic.
Sure. Fair enough. Well, that's essentially a result of IBECON. I mean, that's not a limitation of
Yes.
the platform. That's the way IBECON works. You need an app. Cool. And I guess last question in this list: will my IBECON enable app stop working if I update my M1 AA beacon to the latest firmware from Beacon Stack?
Yes. So Ravi, the answer is that currently, yes, the app will stop working if you change your current beacon stack beacons firmware to to broadcast
to, like,
using
yeah,
the
right.
Eddystone spec. But having said that, as we release the new SDK and as we make improvements to our platform going forward, that shouldn't be the case.
Got it. Okay. Cool. Well, thanks a lot, Nagaraj. That was definitely a very insightful session on Eddystone and what that really means. Which of course brings me to, what's the best way to get started with your beacon project, right? I mean, how can you get going without a developer's help? And how can you start experimenting and using beacons in a project or a proof of concept? So the best way to do that is to buy our Beacon Stack Starter Kit. It's available on our website. It comes with, it's actually the perfect package. It has 3 beacons, enterprise-grade beacons, and these beacons are battery powered. You just have to put AA batteries into them, and they last many years. The default settings. We include access to the Beacon Stack apps. We have an app for iOS as well as Android. We also give you complete access to all the features of the Beacon Stack console and platform for a whole year. You get access to all the campaign management, content management, analytics features, and of course, we give you access to the iOS and Android SDKs that are part of Beacon Stack. So that's a good reason to go and buy this kit and start putting your pilot project action. Quite honestly, a lot of the folks who bought the kit have found that it's a very easy way to get going. It's very intuitive, and it really doesn't require developer cycles to accomplish something and demonstrate it. As a special early bird offer for all of you folks who have dialed in today into this webinar, we are going to give you a 15% discount coupon. So you can use the discount coupon code BSKWB15 and you'll get a 15% off on the $79 that I just mentioned. So yeah, please, if I were you, I would go and buy a kit right now, because we only have this for the first 20 folks who buy a kit using this coupon code. So yeah, go for it, and I'm sure you'll find that it's definitely worth the money that you're going to pay for it. I guess at this point we're done with the presentation. We are happy at this point to also look at all the questions that have come in. Right, Nagaraj? So we'll take a look
Sure.
at the questions that have come into the questions window, and then let's see what people want to know. Question number 1: will the slides be available? Absolutely. That's something Beacon Stack always does. All our webinars are available. All content is made available to you after registration. So yes, absolutely. Number 2, the question says here, can this format be used with any other beacon? I'm guessing you're asking if the Eddystone format works with other beacons. I believe yes, there are some manufacturers out in the market.
It depends on the firmware upgrade that each specific manufacturer has chosen to release.
That's correct. So it depends on that company and the beacon that you're talking about in particular. There are a bunch of questions about the app and the URL, right? And it looks like there are 2 questions around it. Yes, so the URL is being transmitted by the beacon, but for your device, for the users or the customer's device or smartphone to detect the URL or read the URL and then show it, we need an app that is capable of actually reading that packet and doing something with it. And at the moment, it's only supported by Chrome on iOS. That's really what I've been trying to say. Any app could do it, not just Chrome. But at the moment, it's Chrome on iOS and the physical web browser on Android
Yes.
that can read the Eddystone URL frame and then actually display it to the user. So in that sense, you do need at least that app. It's not like it'll work without any app at all, and it's not like your Safari will just pop open and automatically show you a URL. It won't work that way.
By the way,
yes,
just to clarify,
yeah,
even the Chrome browser implementation on iOS
yeah,
is predicated on the fact that notifications for today notifications are turned on.
That's correct. Yes,
it's not like the Chrome browser will automatically open and show the web page.
Yeah, exactly. That would be spam actually.
Yeah.
What do you think? Yeah. Thanks for adding that, Nagaraj. You did mention that during the slides. The next question is, can Eddystone URLs be translated by non-Chrome browsers? Absolutely, they can. In fact, if you use our SDK when we release it, it will be able to read the URL which is in the packet, and you can do whatever you want with it. So there's nothing which says it only has to be done by Chrome. And then we have a question which says, do I have to use Google's nearby proximity APIs, or can I utilize a platform like BeaconStack? Yes, there's absolutely no compulsion to use Google's nearby proximity APIs. You can use Eddystone Beacon, or you can put a beacon into the Eddystone mode and use it with a platform like BeaconStack. Absolutely, they're not coupled in that sense. Eddystone is not coupled to Google's nearby or proximity APIs. There's a next question here about. It looks like you guys have already bought a BeaconStack starter kit. Thank you for your business, and I guess the question is when you get the firmware update. At this point, we are pretty certain that it will be rolled out over the next, roughly 4 to 5 weeks from today. It is currently in progress, but we don't want to roll out an update that is premature. So that's the reason why we want to take some time. But you should expect that you'll get it sometime, sometime in the next 4 to 5 weeks. I guess there are more questions around the app itself. See, I think that there's been this whole perception that somehow Eddystone and Google have killed the need for an app altogether, and I think that's a very wrong perception, right? I mean, that's completely not true. We have, we've known for a while that users' privacy is important. The user needs to be able to opt in, be able to, decide whether they want this or not. So yes, absolutely an app is required. It's just that the app may be something like Chrome, which everyone already has, and may not be, let's say, the specific retailer that you walked into. You still need an app though. How does Eddystone URL display or function on iOS? I think we already described this. Can I use IBECON for my app that has an Eddystone SDK? Are you talking about BeaconStack here? Or, I mean, as we said in the first release, you will be able to use Eddystone. I mean, you can take out beacons and put them in Eddystone mode, and with our SDK, you'll be able to detect them. But obviously, our SDK already supports iBeacon, so that doesn't go away. I hope that answers your question. There are some questions here around iBeacon is a standard and not an Apple thing. Well, quite honestly, it is that iBeacon is an Apple spec, and it turns out that pretty much everyone implements it, and all manufacturers like us support the iBeacon standard. It is very much an Apple thing. That is quite true, with very wide support. Maybe if I may add. Next question is around: Are all three Eddystone frames possible at the same time? I guess theoretically they are possible. It depends on whether your manufacturer supports it or not. At the moment, it looks like they only allow you to switch between between one of these types. So I guess a question about the bus schedule. Yeah, over there it would be basically you'd have the Chrome iOS app installed on your device, and you'd walk to the bus stop somewhere in Rome, and the URL would be broadcast by the Eddystone beacon. The Chrome browser would pick it up and then show it to you, and then it would be a web page, right? So that's how it would display. There's no need for any iBeacon or anything in the pocket. It's just that the device, the beacon itself is installed on the bus stop. That's what we meant in that particular example. So yes, I think we've kind of covered all the questions that have come up today. I guess you're always welcome to send us more questions our way on Twitter. You can reach us on Beacon Stack, as well as on my personal handle, Ravi Pratap. Uh, that really brings us to the end of today's webinar session. Thank you so much for joining us. I recognize that some of you have dialed in from different parts of the world, and it's quite late in parts that are on the east. So thanks a lot for your time, and take care. Have a nice day, and do remember that if you really want to get your hands on a Beacon Stack starter kit, the best way to do that is to buy a kit right now using the discount code that I just gave you over today's webinar session, and that is BSKWB15. Go ahead, use the discount code, and you'll get a 15% off on the $79 list price, and you'll have the beacons at your doorstep in literally a couple of days. I mean, 3 to 5 days at the most. So yeah, definitely do that if you're thinking about it. Thanks a lot for your time, everyone.